It's Indiana in the Morning, presented by First Commonwealth Bank, and it's AM 1160, WCCS and 101.1 FM. He's Marshall Chriswell, and this radio program intended to be for informational purposes only. The information does not constitute legal advice. The law is constantly changing, and the information may not be complete or correct depending on the date in your particular legal problem. Each legal problem depends on its individual facts, and different jurisdictions have different laws and regulations. Because of that, you should not act or rely on any information in this segment without seeking the advice of a competent attorney licensed to practice law in your jurisdiction for your particular problem. There's one of those right across the microphone from me right now. He's Marshall Chriswell. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, I want to talk about something. We talked about adoption last time, and this is, it's not that issue, but it's in the same neighborhood. You're walking down the same street with this issue. I wanted to talk about child support, what the laws are, who has to pay child support, spousal support as well, for that matter, and talk about that issue, because I know that there can be doubts, and we just talked about different laws, different jurisdictions, depending upon where you live. I would assume that applies in the arena of child support and spousal support as well.
Well, that does, yeah. Support laws can vary a little bit from state to state. For the most part, there are some model laws that have been adopted so that it's pretty consistent throughout the country, but there are definitely some variations. Here in Pennsylvania, as you mentioned, we do have essentially two different types of support that are available when a couple separates. And one is child support and the other is spousal support. And both of those are administered through the state court system by way of the Domestic Relations Division, which here in Indiana County is located in the Atrium building here in downtown.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's start with child support. Couple breaks up, there's a child who lives with one parent or the other, and the other must pay support a certain amount, I assume, per month in order to support that child. How long? What are the types of expenses that we're getting into? Is it a set amount? Talk about that whole issue and what someone might get into as they follow that path.
Yeah, the first thing to note is that it doesn't have to be a married couple. Okay, any folks that have a child together, there's going to be a child support obligation if one of the parents files for it. Doesn't have to be a married couple, and there doesn't have to be a divorce. Child support is initiated by one parent filing a complaint for child support with domestic relations. And procedurally, the first thing that happens is that Domestic Relations schedules a child support conference, which is kind of a semi-formal proceeding. There's not a judge or a courtroom. It's a conference room with a conference officer appointed by DRS, Domestic Relations. And it gives the parents the opportunity to sit down, usually with their lawyers, in the conference setting, and the conference officer will gather income information from each parent and what we'd call run the numbers, determine what the guideline support amount is going to be. So Pennsylvania has a formula. The law sets forth, like most states, the law sets forth what this formula is for the calculation of a child support obligation. And essentially, without getting too far into the weeds, you look at the disparity in the parties' incomes, and then so you look at what the total income is, and that gives you the obligation, and then you look at the disparity in the income, and that tells you actually what one spouse is going to have to pay the other. Mm-hmm. Now, usually it works out that the parent who has custody of the child, primary custody, meaning more than 50% of the custodial time, is going to be what we'd call the obligee, the one that's getting paid. Okay. And the parent who doesn't have primary custody, who has partial custody, is going to be the obligor, the one that's paying. Mm-hmm. But the way that the calculations work, the way the formula works, it's possible that you would have a parent who has primary custody but also has a far superior income or earning power to the spouse or the parent who doesn't have custody, and then that parent could actually end up paying. So it could kind of be flip-flop, just the way that the formula works.
One of the things that we often find out when we find that there are violations is that a financial situation for somebody changed. They came into money, or they went the other direction, and they have lost a lot of money. And the payments, are they adjusted according to changing income status?
Absolutely. Whenever we've talked in the past about child custody laws, I've always said, child custody is modifiable at any time. And child support is the same way. It's modifiable at any time if there's a change in circumstances. Now, each parent does have an ongoing obligation to inform domestic relations of any change in their income. So that also includes, if you get a big bonus at work, or you get a workers' comp disability payment, or you win the lottery, or, as you said, if you have a reduction in income, you lose. If you see this a lot with folks who work jobs where they have a lot of overtime, and then hours get cut back, and that causes a significant reduction in income. But you have an ongoing obligation to report your income, to report changes in your income, and it can be very beneficial to file to have your child support obligation modified if you know that you have a decrease in working hours or decrease in pay coming up, because that is, you're exactly right, where you see the most of the time when I get a phone call, somebody says, that they are what we call in the arrears. They're behind on their child support payments, and now they're being that they have an order that they're in contempt of court. Maybe they're being put on probation. Maybe they're having their hunting license, fishing license suspended, or maybe they're even being threatened with jail time. Most of the time, when there's a contempt situation, it's because the order is outdated. The order is based on a prior employment or number of hours that they were working that are no longer available to them.
New information has come in. Now, beyond the obvious difference between child and spouse, swing it over to the spousal support side of it. I would assume that can be a much more complicated calculation.
Actually, it's a little bit simpler.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It is basically, in most cases, it is the disparity between the parties' incomes, and then you take a look at, okay, how big is that gap? Okay, if one parent nets $1,000 a month and another parent nets $2,000 a month, or another spouse in this case, you don't have to have children involved. So there's a $1,000 disparity there, and the spousal support is 40% of that.
Okay.
The higher earning spouse pays 40%. Now, if there's also child support involved in the case, then it's lowered. I think it's always 30% then, but it's so there's a little bit of variation there. But that's a pretty simple calculation, and that's one of the things. Spousal support. Sometimes when a new client comes in and they have a divorce that that either hasn't been filed yet, or it was filed and it's kind of languishing. Nobody's taken any steps to really finalize it or move it forward. Sometimes you meet with a spouse that's really struggling financially, can't make ends meet, can't find a decent place to live, can't get their basic utility bills paid and things like that, and also in that regard, hasn't been able to come up with the money to find an attorney to pursue the divorce. A lot of times in those cases, that spouse hasn't ever filed for spousal support. And so, their standard of living, whenever from the time that they were married and living with a spouse who was the primary breadwinner, to, going to basically being on their own with maybe they had no career, no job, or a part-time job, trying to make ends meet in that situation, it's very important to immediately file for spousal support and keep at least some semblance of your financial well-being. Keep it stable.
tossing a bunch of assumptions your way and asking you to comment on them. Child abuse, child support would obviously end when the child becomes an adult, yes?
Child support ends when the child turns 18 or graduates from high school, whichever is later.
All right. And spousal support, is there a term on it that is more as concrete as that?
Spousal support ends when the divorce is final.
Okay.
Okay, so now there are some cases there's a law for short-term marriages, and I think it's marriages under 3 years or under,
Okay.
and there's an outward deadline on those. But for all other cases, spousal support is basically going to continue until the divorce is finalized. And there's a little bit of nuance there, but that's the basic rule.
But in both of those support cases, spousal and child support, the consultation with the attorney has to be extremely important and from the very beginning of the process, I would assume.
Yeah, because really, if there's anything that's constant about divorce work, is that I see that these situations are unstable. If there's anything constant, it's that they're unstable, and you want to plan moving forward. Where am I going to live? Where are my children going to live? How are we going to support ourselves? What do the next 5 years look like for me? Mm-hmm. That all is kind of out the window in whenever a divorce is filed. It's very, very difficult to picture, okay, how are we going to get through this? And so it's hugely important to sit down and say, okay, what could the potential child and spousal support figures be? How do we, if there are complicated cases such as where you have a spouse who is self-employed or has inconsistent income, how are we going to manage that, and what's the support order going to look like? So it's absolutely important to hire an attorney from the get-go.
Tremendously stressful. My goodness.
Yeah.
That conference where you meet with those folks who are in that situation just must be heartbreaking. Oh.
It can be very, very much so.
So if folks want to know more about either of those topics, they need to contact you how?
You can go on the web and find my contact information at westernpalawyer.com. Stop by and visit me in the Atrium building in downtown Indiana, or call 465-5826.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thanks.
It's Indiana in the Morning, AM 1160 WCCS, 101.1 FM.